Lancaster, Massachusetts, a place of startling natural beauty. It is the oldest town in its county, set some 40 miles inland from Boston. The name of the local elementary school bears witness that the town remembers one of its early residents, Mary Rowlandson. In 1675, Lancaster was a frontier town of about 50 families. The morning of the 10th of February, Rowlandson looked out of her house to the sound of gunfire and the sight of the burning town. Matacomet, son of the Wampanoag chief who had signed a treaty with the Pilgrims in 1621, brought war to the settlers, primarily because of the growing greed of the colonists for native lands and the competition for natural resources. Rowlandson's own house, which was situated in this field, soon came under attack. She writes, "Some in our house were fighting for their lives, others wallowing in their blood, the house on fire over our heads, and the bloody heathen ready to knock us on the head if we stirred out. Now might we hear mothers and children crying out for themselves and one another, 'Lord, what shall we do?'" Rowlandson, with her daughter in her arms, fled from the house. Both were promptly wounded and abducted by the native people, and she was held for nearly 12 weeks, during which the army moved frequently. The first camp spot is atop this hill. Rowlandson's daughter died in captivity. Rowlandson, however, was later ransomed and wrote an extremely popular narrative of her captivity and restoration, seen here in its printing by the local historical society. After 3 centuries, her story still captivates. In her narrative, Rowlandson mixes vivid description of her situation with analysis of a particularly puritanical nature. In Backgrounds of American Literary Thought, Rod Horton and Herbert Edwards note that in the Puritan mind, every happening, however minute, was the direct result of God's working out His purposes in the world. Secure in what they felt to be the unalterable fact of God's presence in the world, the Puritans felt free to exercise to the utmost their powers of reason in attempting to attain some faint concept of the true nature of God. Rowlandson's task, then, was to frame her ordeal in biblical terms. She searches Scripture in her own beliefs for reasons for what she endured. Additionally, she attempts to edify her reader. The piece is, in many ways, a religious tract, with goals similar to those of a sermon. In Literature and Theology in Colonial New England, Kenneth Murdoch writes that all literature was, for the Puritan, a means to a useful end, and the most useful of all ends was, of course, to teach religious truth and to incite readers to follow God. Rowlandson would have felt a strong responsibility to lead her readers to God. Central in the Puritans' mindset was the belief that, as Kenneth Silverman writes in The Founding of a Nation, the entire community would be punished for the sins of any one member. God would punish all for the failings of any. Thus, each Puritan took upon him or herself the fate of the entire community. Perhaps the central message Rowlandson aims to leave her readers with is of how their situation is always at the pleasure of God. They can lose all they have in an instant. As she writes, "I have seen the extreme vanity of this world. 1 hour I have been in health and wealth, wanting nothing, but the next hour in sickness and wounds and death, having nothing but sorrow and affliction." She confesses to desiring such affliction, and she certainly got it. Yet, and now we come to her second major point, she made it through in a way she'd like others to understand. As she puts it, "I see when God calls a person to anything, He is fully able to carry them through and make them see and say they have been gainers thereby." Finally, she ends with what is really the crux of puritanical theology. We must rely on God Himself, she writes. Our whole dependence must be on Him.